Varus is currently an extremely powerful pick in the meta right now, and it's no surprise that he always ends up creeping his way to the top of the ADC leaderboards. Defined by his excellent matchup curve, consistent CC capabilities, and flexibility to fit into most team compositions, he's definitely a champion that can reward smart game planning and taking advantage of this malleable playstyle. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on general concepts of Varus's purpose as a champion and what success looks like in games that you are doing well in him. We'll then discuss different components of his kit and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. This includes going over different matchups, rune optimizations, ability maxing, your build, pathing, and how to play out each phase of the game. If you enjoyed this video, would really appreciate a like on it if it helped you out. Moving on. Varus's main strengths come from his generalist kit that give him the ability to succeed in effectively any team composition. These are the main reasons why. He has above average reach through his 575 attack range and his screen length ability ranges. He also has strong laning because of this and can be a safe pick in most early drops as well. And he has several versions of his build, most importantly, that he can really flex and adapt to in order to shift on being an on-hit champion or really a long-range poke siege champion with his lethality builds. This is defined by his two main builds, being a lethality build for the poke build and an on-hit build, as well as even an AP build in more dire situations if you really want to. This adaptability makes him really annoying to play against, really no matter what situation or composition that you're placed in, and actually gives him a lot of agency regardless of this. This conversation starts with the rune setups, where he has 3 distinct playstyles in lane where I can root from this. I'll break them down into 2 categories here. We have his 2 lethality build paths with Arcane Comet or Halo Blades as his keystones, and his main on-hit keystone being Lethal Tempo. While Varus has a ton of flexibility when choosing which keystone is best for the situation and team comp, it's also important to have the sense of which one is best as a player, or else you might end up wasting a valuable resource for your build. For overall reference, Comet is best for lanes and compositions where you are focusing on heavy poke and the enemy doesn't have a strong sustained answer. In this version, in addition to Comet, ideal runes are Mana 4 Band, Absolute Focus, and Scorched to keep up your poke. The Halo Blade page differentiates itself from Comet for lanes when you have a support that has much more all-in pressure, in which case Hop can be great for one-shotting people. In this page, you can take Taste of Blood, Zombie Ward, or Eyeball Collection, as well as Treasure Hunter. In both of these pages, you ideally want to round off your secondary tree with Inspiration, taking free ass boots and cookies, which makes your early laning really consistent and gives you a really great mid-game spike since you won't need to purchase boots. Lethal Tempo comes in handy against tankier team compositions where Lethality Varus probably won't have much use. This sets up his build such that he can play for longer fights and make use of his on-hit abilities and blight stacks. No matter which page you go for here, your adaptive runes will generally be the same. 1 attack speed rune, 1 adaptive force rune, and then 1 resistance rune of choice depending on the damage type of your lane opponent. To go along with these rune setups are the different variants of Varus's build, which help define them a little bit further. Note that in this build section we'll talk about overall versions of it as of the time of the video, but I highly recommend going on pro builds or UGG to get the most up-to-date information. In this version, your starting items are either Doran's Blade in matchups where you need the health and survivability. Otherwise, starting Longsword is actually pretty ideal to maximize the length of time that you can poke. Investing the 350 gold into your primary items also helps you hit your 2-item spike much faster than going for a Doran's Blade, which stalls you out by 450. Off of this, you want to aim to at least pick up a tier on your first base, and then move into Yomu's as your first lethality item. Combining this with your free 35 movement speed boots typically means that you don't even need to invest into tier 2 boots most of the time later into the game. From here, you can finish off Fanimune and then settle into your mythic for your 3rd item. Most of the time in the lethality build, this is going to be Eclipse, since it gives you much needed sustain, as well as increasing your capability into tanks. If you hold tab though and you see that it's super inconvenient for the enemy team to itemize armor, then I believe even itemizing into something like Prowler's Claw can be a great choice. From 4th item and beyond, itemizing becomes a balance between securing more armor penetration and looking for items that secure your safety. So lethality / armor pen items like Edge of Night, Serilda's Grudge, Umbroglaive, or even things like Axiom Arc can help for full commitment to that style. Since lethality Varus is so inherently safe thanks to its range, you don't want to build defensively that often anyway, but if you do, items like Maw or Guardian Angel can help increase your survivability. Something to keep in mind here though is that you generally don't want the game to go on that long though, so going 6 items on this build isn't honestly that ideal. You want to avoid this situation if possible. For the on-hit version of Varus, your mythic of choice ends up being Shield Bow very often thanks to its great build path and how it gives him the right amount of survivability in fights a lot of the time. I'd recommend building Vamp Scepter as your first component for Shield Bow in particular, as a sustain it gives in lane ensures that you can stay for longer and based on proper timers and nullify most matchups. After this, on-hit Varus typically goes for really weird items with Guinsu's and Berserker Greaves rounding out the mid game, and then Runons as his 3rd item to really increase his ability to melt down teams. If you find that you don't really need need the AoE of Rudons in teamfights, then Phantom Dancer is honestly a great substitute for this as well. From here, you're going to pick up more on-hit items to help his on-hit capability, of course, so things like Bork or Wit's End make for welcome additions here, as well as even other crit items like LDR to supplement this. Now touching on ability usage in teamfighting, it of course changes if you're focused more on the lethality build, since your abilities are so much more important. Let's start with lane, since this is the point where things are generally the same regardless of your build. Your E will be your 1-point wonder in most builds, since it has so much presence in levels 1 through 3. It's huge, has very little counterplay, and presents a pretty heavy amount of poke to give various advantageous trades early on. A small tip here is to time it to when the enemy goes for CS, so that they are pretty much forced to eat it periodically through lane and get chip damage. Since your E also slows, a good rule of thumb I'd say is to use your Q only after hitting your E, since the enemy's reduced movement speed will help a ton in actually hitting your shots. The same mindset applies here after you hit 6. You generally want to lead with your ultimate, then use the root to be able to hit everything else, including your empowered Q. One super important thing to keep in mind here is that your cooldowns are greatly reduced when you hit your abilities on targets afflicted with blight stacks. For example, if you hit 2 fully blight stack targets with your Q, you actually pretty much get to use your Q again for free, which is crazy. In the mid game, this is where you start to see a divergence in the styles between the two main Varus builds. Lethality Varus thrives when playing miles away from the enemy, since all of his damage is loaded into his abilities, which have effectively enough range for him to play team fights without much contact in general. Make sure to leverage this strength to siege objectives and give yourself space from the enemy engage. Weaving in auto attacks is also an important component even on the Lethality Varus, because it's basically just good ADC hygiene. On hit, Varus swaps the roles of his auto attacks and abilities, having his autos be the forefront of his damage and his abilities being more of a supplement to it. We want to be using our abilities to mainly proc the damage on blight stacks, so faster casts and more auto attacks will be the focus here. This also means that your team fighting range is going to be much more centered around your auto attack range rather than the long range of your abilities. Touching on matchups really quickly, I'd say that Varus doesn't really have a tough time overall against most lanes, and it helps that he also synergizes well with most support champions in the game as well, so he can really be flexible in an environment like solo queue especially. The only times where he would truly struggle are in cases where champions can both nullify his poke and deal a similar amount of damage in lane like Jhin, or against champions that have a lot of kill threat inherently like Tristana or Draven. Overall though, Varus is one of those champions that when he's good, you really notice right away. He's very well rounded, can succeed in most environments, and you might find that there's not that many direct answers to him at times. It's because of this that in times when he is good, it's very rewarding to invest the time to learn about his specific strengths. As always, hope this video was insightful to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.